This is a recent study that was just done, very large, well done study that asked the question, what is the number one reason or what is the top reason why people are not buying an electric vehicle today? And the answer is still cost. That is still one of the major reasons. It comes cost. The second is charging stations availability, battery tech's not available, prefers a gas engine, and so forth. So the question I have for you is like, with them reducing the prices like this, with cost still being the top priority for electric vehicles, what is the effect on OEM, the traditional car makers? And would you agree that they need to reduce the prices of their cars to sell more? And just another data point to throw out here is that the prices of the Model 3 and the Model Y today is the same as when they first launched it in the Model 3 in 2018 and the Model Y in 2020. This is, COVID economies caused the prices to skyrocket, therefore higher margin. And now what they're just doing is bring it back to what they originally intended.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on this?
So a couple things. Cost. So I think Elon stated that they've been able to pull out, I think 30% of the cost of the
Right.
Model 3 since they launched it. And we've seen that. We've seen those improvements
Yes.
because we tore down an original Model 3. And if you look at a Model Y compared to a Model 3, the improvements in the body with the gigacastings, even the body side inner, so some of the large steel pieces went from multi-piece weldments to large hot stamp ultra high strength steel. The way that they monitor the temperature and the BMS on the batteries was reduced from 5 sensors to 2 on each BMS. The hardware 4 or the Gen 4 drive unit that's now in the vehicle has which will soon be in the vehicle with the integrated oil filter, the hairpin stator, the aluminum rotor for the front induction motor, the reduction in silicon carbide use. The list goes on and on and on and on. So they were selling that Model 3 in the early days essentially at break even or at a loss. And we did a should cost at about $36,000, I think, for a all-wheel drive long range Model 3 back in 2018. That was the total bill of material cost, and they were selling it for about 50,000. The vehicle we bought, that's all-wheel drive long range. And I know you mentioned 39,000, but that must be for the short range rear-wheel drive, which they didn't really sell that very many of. And
Mm.
the margin is really razor thin early on. But as companies produce at scale, if they're willing to innovate at a rapid pace, they can pull that cost out, and they have. So price versus cost is very important because Tesla has been relentlessly attacking their cost structure. They've also been adding some feature. They've added some cost back in. In 2020, all Model 3s now get a heat pump with the super manifold and octo
Mhm.
valve, which brings more value to the customer. So you want to serve the mission of getting as many EVs in people's hands as possible, but you also want to serve the customer because if you don't have a phenomenal customer experience, people will bail and abandon your products. And I think one of the strongest elements of as a Tesla owner, what they have is that people who have Teslas will take their friends and other people in a ride, and they
Mhm.
can't believe how fast the vehicles are, how quiet they are, the infotainment system, how responsive it is. So, from a software perspective, from a usability perspective, the Model Y and Model 3, they provide tremendous value at that middle price point. And then cost to a lot of people is one of the biggest issues. But in that chart you showed, there was still a significant amount of people that said they prefer a gas engine. And when I look at
Yes.
that, when I
Yeah.
see somebody prefers a gas engine, that is like someone in 1905 saying, I like shoveling shit, from my horse. I
Yeah.
prefer the
Yeah.
smell of the stable, versus my, gasoline powered or electric vehicle back in 1910 or 20. And oh my God, why would you prefer the complexity, the noise, and the extreme inefficiency of a gasoline engine, I think what they should have said is they prefer you prefer the range that's afforded by a gasoline engine. I just thought that was hilarious that it was on the chart. It was like the 3rd or 4th one down. They prefer a gas engine? What? Okay. So
Yeah.
moving past that, the OEMs who make gas internal combustion engine vehicles right now, they're really struggling with the decision to transition all their efforts into EVs because the profitability isn't there the way that their businesses are set up. You're looking at 180,000 employees at General Motors. Thousands, probably 10, 20,000 engineers are transmission and emissions calibrators. I know a lot of people who work at General Motors, and that's what they do. So now those people need to transition to calibration efforts on what? The thermal systems and drivelines of EVs. But frankly, the complexity of an electric vehicle drops dramatically because there's much less vibration, there's less heat loss, there's less noise. So many of the complex problems that have been solved and cared for over the past 3 decades are eliminated because you have an electric motor that doesn't vibrate. It doesn't violently shake. It doesn't get hot, or it gets
Mm.
hot. It doesn't get very hot. And because of that, you have these organizations and these facilities and these testing facilities and these standards that were all developed for a dying solution to transportation.
Yeah, so looks like that the traditional automakers have a choice to make today, right? I just went through the price cuts. So they just did even more price cuts. And so I imagine that the board members of Toyota and Ford and GM and others, they're sitting there going, "What do we do?" Because as you compare the Tesla cars against their cars, they're going to either respond, and some of them might actually not be able to continue. Do they go all in electric vehicles, or do they cut the electric vehicles? Like we just heard today that GM's going to cut the Bolt production, and they have to decide, right, to stay right side to continue the margins, or do they just do a complete switch over? What do you think their reaction is right now, the traditional car makers, and what would your recommendation be to them?
Well, if you're a traditional OEM and you saw Tesla raising their prices and raising their prices, what that did is that built in a spot for you to develop your business case. So if the Model Y price was rising, and it was
Mhm.
rising, it rose over 60,000 US dollars. Now an OEM a traditional OEM could have been developing a product that would have fit in that 50 to $55,000 range with similar performance and similar range and capability and over-the-air updates. And you built your business case off of that, being able to be the low-cost provider, providing the same functional objective. Well, now Tesla just dropped that all the way down to 49,000. So now all of a sudden, you are similar, maybe the same or slightly better to a Model Y, which is a now a 3.5-year-old platform. If you count the Model 3 being the same platform, it's really a 5-year-old, 6-year-old platform. Now you're not the cost leader. The Tesla's the cost leader, and the Tesla has all the cachet and the street cred, and people want Teslas, and they don't even have to market, and they can still make margin at that $49,000 number and increase their market share and retain their lead in the EV space. Now, when it comes to the Chinese players, it's a whole different story when you're talking about China. So I'm not
Mm.
super well informed on the China aspect of it, but you just have to kind of shake your head when you look at China because their market is so big that their traditional players can suck up all that volume. Look at BYD,
Mhm.
NIO, Xiaopeng, and Tesla's playing pretty well in China, and they have their Giga Shanghai. But it'll be interesting to see how far they drop in China as other OEMs, come online.
Okay, yeah, let me show you that. I do have that prepared here. So this is the position of Tesla against China right now in 2023. So this is January to March 26th. You can see the top 20 models. This is pretty surprising. People they don't believe me when I say this, that when you look at all the cars being sold in China, regardless of whether or not they're a battery electric vehicle or whether or not they're a hybrid or they're a fuel car, Model Y is the number one. This is irregardless of segment also and the price points, because it includes the micros and the minis in here as well. So the number one is Model Y. That is the number one
I
number of
had
units.
I
Mhm.
had no idea. That's
Yeah,
wild. And
it's
wasn't it the
wild.
top selling vehicle in Europe as well?
It's top selling vehicle in Europe. So, but this is shocking because this is China, and everybody kept saying, if you look at it, okay, the number one is a battery, the next one is a battery, then it's a hybrid song, then a fuel car, then you got the Dolphins and the Nuans. They're there as well. But you can see that the Model 3 is the number 10. And a nice way to view this is this graph here, which explains a little bit. So it's hard for people to see this, but this is the 2022 fiscal year market share of the electric vehicle market share, and you can see that the Model Y is up here. This is the price range. So around here, this is in yuan. So divided by 7, you'll get the $50,000, around $50,000 here, US dollars. The Model Y is the leader in the expensive premium. You got the Model 3, then you got your BYD Han and the Zeekr. Those are the ones competing in that premium. But whenever you hear that BYD is succeeding so much, it's because there's no competition. Tesla has no area to compete in the 30,000, 20,000 US dollar or even sub. This is where you see the BYD Dolphin and Yuan Plus, and then this is the micro cars, the mini EVs, sub
Yeah.
$5,000, and they're like just cheap cars getting sold. So all of this is where the Chinese market plays, but it comes to anything premium, but it is wild. It is wild. So I wanted to ask you this. This is what's happening here in the US. This is January and February of 2023, the second column. How many units sold? And Tesla is number one. And you can see it for 2 months, it's 95,000 versus Chevy mostly by Bolts, 14,000, and then 10,000 for Fords and Volkswagen. So this is how it breaks down in terms of who's selling the EVs in the last 2 months, anyways, January, February.
It looks like
Um,
Tesla
yeah,
sold more than the next of
they
the
do.
next
If you add
next
them
9.
all up, yep, all next time up, Tesla has still sold well more than all of them together. Um, but yeah, I mean, so
Yeah,
when
but
you just
the
Mhm.
mainstream media though would focus on the change aspect,
Right, they
and
do.
there would be an article that says, Rivian, Ford,
Yep,
Volkswagen, and General Motors growth averages,
yep,
3,000%, and Tesla's lags behind at 35%. They'd be focusing on the percentage year over year growth instead of, you know,
yeah.
uh, the amount of vehicles. Because look, it's actually an additional, what, 24,000 vehicles, which is more than the next two combined. Yeah. Okay.
So I wanted to ask you though, I mean, if you are the expert, you're in the auto industry and you're watching GM with their Chevy Bolts or whatever going from 92 to 14,000. So they're finally making them, but it's still
Yeah.
smaller
I
numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's skewed because I think they stopped selling in the
Mhm.
first quarter last year because of the battery recall. Remember that?
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's right.
so
That's right.
they were selling the Bolt, quarter by quarter, then they had to stop selling them until they
Mhm.
figured out the battery recall. So that's why you see the 15,000 increase, but I think 14,000 is still relatively healthy. The Chevy Bolt is a good value. If you just want an EV that's small
Mhm.
and cheap and does things decent, but I don't think it brings the same uh, true value in the functional objectives that somebody wants out of a automobile. It's too
Mhm.
small. The range isn't good enough for long road tripping, in my opinion. I think in order for a long road trip, you need at least 300 miles of range to really comfortably drive across the country. I don't know. We'll see. That's an interesting chart.